Hi, my name is Rochelle Mulder. I will be talking about smartphone oblivion in context of road safety and designing the user experience of a smartphone notification application. Smartphone oblivion, which includes activities such as walking and typing, listening to music through headphones, and conversing while walking, is considered a growing threat in public spaces, especially roadways. A holistic approach is required to address road safety issues resulting from smartphone oblivion. To date, a variety of solutions have been proposed in these categories. Recognizing the smartphone as the most direct point of contact with an individual, this research project set out to transform the device from the source of distraction into a road safety measure by warning pedestrians distracted by their smartphones of upcoming interactions with traffic. The smartphone has already been leveraged to guard pedestrians in road safety context. GPS, the rear-facing camera, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and other onboard sensors of smartphones have been applied to detect and warn distracted pedestrians of potentially dangerous situations. Wi-Fi honk, heads up, and tug are only a few examples of smartphone concepts aimed at reducing smartphone oblivion. However, this research project does not set out to study or improve the technology for detecting dangerous situations. Instead, it focuses on the content of the message that is presented to a distracted pedestrian under these circumstances. The aim is to determine whether a distracted pedestrian cares how they are alerted, and if so, what is the most suited tone of voice for communicating a notification of this nature. The following research question was developed. What is the most suitable tone of voice for notifying a distracted pedestrian of a potentially dangerous situation? To be able to answer this question, I had to do three things. I had to develop a functioning smartphone application to alert distracted pedestrians. I called it LOOKApp. Secondly, I had to deliver a notification to gain their attention and warn them of an upcoming junction and instruct them to look up. Thirdly, 3 messages, each with a different tone of voice, would be tested to determine the most suitable tone of voice for notifying a distracted pedestrian of a potentially dangerous situation. The tone of the messages were varied along these 4 dimensions: humor, formality, respectfulness, and enthusiasm. The next step was to develop the methodology for the delivery of these various components. The rest of this presentation is structured in accordance with this diagrammatical representation of the methodology. Firstly, we look at the selected research methods. Questionnaires, ethnographic field studies, and interviews were used at various stages of the research to collect qualitative and quantitative data. A questionnaire was used as part of the initial user research to determine people's perception on smartphone oblivion, how often they exhibit this behavior, and what activities they perform on their smartphones while walking. The questionnaire was also used to recruit suitable participants for the user testing. Based on the findings of the initial user research, a single proto-persona was developed to represent a typical user of LOOKApp. James, the proto-persona, and his 3 scenarios were used to develop the test script and plan the user testing. Initially, a total of 10 messages were developed using a layout template as shown here. The order of the elements were varied slightly, but each message included a warning, instruction, and visual aid. The next task was to determine whether my intended tone of voice matched the perceived tone of voice of others. Participants were asked to rate the tone of voice for each of the 10 messages along the 4 dimensions. The classifications, underlined in bold, denote the intended tone of voice of the message. As you can see, only option 3 and option 6 match the intended tone of voice. And these are the final 4 messages. Take note of option 4, as I will make reference to this a little bit later. In addition to profiling the tone of voice, the participants were asked which one of the messages they preferred and why. Based on this and the profiling, 3 messages were selected for inclusion in the user testing. Option 3 and option 5 received an equal number of votes as the most preferred messages. Interestingly and conveniently, the tone of voice profiles for these 2 options were diametrically opposite. The third was selected on the basis that it was perceived as mostly neutral and matched the average profile pattern across all the messages for all the participants. The next step was to develop LOOKApp. Bluetooth low-energy beacons are proximity devices that are used to trigger an event in a smartphone, such as a notification, based on its relative position to the device. SD-mode beacons were used in the project. They support both iBeacon and Eddystone packets, but LOOKApp was developed for iOS. This is the most simplistic notification that can be triggered by iBeacon. Despite agreeing to receive push notification from LOOKApp when the app was first installed, iOS does not allow the app to be brought to the foreground without the consent of the user. When an event is triggered in LOOKApp, the user is presented with a notification from LOOKApp. On interaction with the banner, the message content is presented to the user. Android does not have the same limitation. As a result, this could have been circumvented if LOOKApp was developed for Android devices instead. However, with iOS 10 came rich notifications. This allows media to be included within the notification banner itself. Rich notifications are triggered by performing a 3D gesture. This includes pressing down firmly or performing a downward swipe motion on the notification banner. A 3D gesture will present the message within the notification framework, but if the user fails to perform a 3D gesture and simply taps the notification, LOOKApp will be brought to the foreground, which also contains the message content. The use of rich notifications was considered as a compromise for not presenting the message content outright. LOOKApp and the three message designs were tested with 20 users. The users were asked to perform the three tasks associated with James the proto-persona scenarios. To account for bias, the order in which the messages were presented during each session was randomized using a Latin square. The user test sessions comprised of three parts: the pre-test briefing, the test sessions itself, and the post-test interview. This image was taken from the GoPro footage from one of the test sessions. It shows the location of the iBeacon and the user's relative position to the junction at the moment they access the notification content. This image shows the test setup from the perspective of the test facilitator. I walk diagonally behind the user to observe their interaction with the app and to prevent them from stepping into the traffic if the notification was not presented at the correct moment. During the post-test interview, users were asked a number of questions about their experience. The three main metrics that were collected in the post-test interview were which message the user remembered the clearest after the test, the user's favorite message from memory, and which message the user preferred after being shown all three messages side by side. While the majority of users remembered and favored option 2, they preferred option 1 as they felt that this was more appropriate under the circumstances. The use of the warning road sign was considered to be effective due to its familiarity to users. Another motivation for preferring option 1 was that the other message images required processing and interpretation. This was considered as time-consuming and counterintuitive for refocusing a distracted pedestrian's attention on their surroundings in the shortest possible time. Users valued that LOOKApp refocused their attention. However, notifications must be worthy of a user's attention, even if it is an emergency. Distracted pedestrians should only receive alerts regarding potentially dangerous interactions with road traffic if it is an imminent threat. So, what can be concluded from the research? What lessons were learned? Although the research revealed that the users do have preference towards tone of voice when being warned of an upcoming interaction with road traffic, the overall reliability and validity of the research needs to be considered before such conclusions can be made. An objective review of the research revealed that there were some issues around both the reliability and the validity of the research. As a start, the sample sizes for the initial user research, the tone of voice profiling, and the user testing were 107, 38, and 20 participants respectively. As these samples are not representative of the population, the results cannot be generalized. Other considerations which may affect the reliability include the general principles that were applied during the design of the messages. For example, more consideration should have been given to the layout and message format itself. Also, the design should guard against independent variables such as environmentally derived habits and predispositions of users. This means that designs should not be culturally or geographically specific, as was the case for the Amber Man or reference to Safe Cross Code, which is exclusively Irish. Finally, the 4 dimensions for profiling tone of voice may be appropriate for web content, but it was not suitable for classifying messages of this nature. As shown here, on average, the majority of participants opted for neutral when asked to rate the tone of voice along the 3rd and 4th dimensions. The challenge experienced by participants to classify the tone of voice is a reflection of the complexity to vary the designs along these 2 dimensions, especially given the concisely prescribed nature of the message content. Retrospectively, a bespoke and simplified framework should have been developed for this purpose if time permitted. Despite these shortcomings, the overall research methodology described in this presentation is considered to be acceptable for answering the research question. In light of this, it can be thought as a pilot study for a larger study to determine a population's preference towards tone of voice in context of road safety. The following footage was taken from the GoPro recordings of the user testing sessions. It shows the test facilitator hand the phone to the user. As the user walks, he types his address in 2 ways. He receives and accesses a notification received from LOOKApp. It warns him of the upcoming junction and instructs him to look up. Thank you very much.